Alright, welcome back. This is part 3 of our Unit 1 introductory set of videos. So I wrapped up the last video talking about navigating through the chapters in the Smart Book online. And once again, like I said, I recommend just reading through the entire chapter first before you answer any questions, just like you would with a traditional textbook. So you can move through, adjust the size of the text as needed, and read through the chapter. Once you're ready to answer some questions related to the chapter reading, you can go and click this practice button. The practice button is how you're going to access the practice questions, which is how you get your Smart Quiz grades. So click on the practice button when you're ready to start answering questions, and it will have a question up on the screen. So what you will always see is a question at the top. You will see a number of answers that you can choose as what you think is the right answer. And then it's going to ask you how confident you are in your answer as well. This is just a further way to gauge how well you're retaining the information from the readings. Once again, your grades are not determined by how many questions you get right or wrong, but further how far you go through the completion down here in your completion bar. So as you do answer questions correct, you will make progress in this bar and you will have less items left. Once you have no items left, you have completed the practice quiz and you will get full credit, 15 out of 15. If you only make it halfway, you'll get half credit, so on and so forth. So when you're answering a question, there's one really handy tool, which is the read about this button. If you're not sure about the question and rather than guessing, you would like to jump back to the text, you can click here and it will take you back to the relevant area of the chapter that corresponds to this question. If you already know that the process of creating shared meaning between the mass media and their audiences is known as mass communication, which it is, we can just go ahead and click that answer. We can say, I know it, and it will say, your answer is correct. If my answer was incorrect, I'd just say okay, and I could continue, and it asked me another question that was on a similar topic. Now that I did get it right, I can say okay. It'll move on to the next question, and you can see I have one less item left on my progress bar at the bottom. So just continue with those until you complete all of the questions. You can always jump back to the chapter by clicking the read button down here in the bottom left, and it will take you back to the chapter. Okay, I'm going to jump out of the Smart Book now and this as a student. Alright, so once again, that was Cobra. That was the Smart Book. I want to wrap up this last part of this introductory Unit 1 video by just talking about a couple key points from Chapter 1's reading and touching on it maybe in just a little bit more detail. So, jumping right into it, we want to make sure that we understand the definition of communication. Now, we're not talking mass communication yet. We haven't gotten that specific. Just starting by defining what is communication. Communication is transmitting a message from a source to a receiver. Now, this takes place in all sorts of forms. So there is interpersonal communication. That is not what we're concerned with in this class. That is things like face-to-face communication, public speaking, talking on the phone, and things like this. Whereas when we get into defining mass comm, you'll see we're talking specifically about mass media and how we use that in our individual lives, how society uses that as a whole, and so on and so forth. But communication, transmitting a message from a source to a receiver, very important. There must be a sharing of meaning. It's a two-way street. The sender and the receiver must be engaged in the process in order for communication to take place. So, looking at when does communication occur, a source It always starts with the source. They send a message. Many different examples of messages, everything from a blog post to a television show to a newspaper article to a song. All of these things could be messages. They're sent through a medium. The medium is what carries the message, and then it arrives at a receiver, producing some sort of effect. Many effects can be produced. You will read about that in the chapter. There's a few different models of communication that are used to try to understand communication and different types. This is looking specifically at interpersonal communication, things like face-to-face communication. You've got a message, it's sent, it's decoded by a receiver, interpreted, and then encoded and sent back as a new message back and to the where the sender then becomes the receiver, and the process continues as a cycle of encoding and decoding. So we have to understand, okay, what do we mean by encoding? Encoding is simply the way that a way that a message is encoded. A perfect example is, if I want to write a paper, I'm encoding a message when I'm typing those words out on the computer in a Word document. Okay, that is a process of encoding a message. I could encode a message by talking into the microphone on a live radio station broadcast. Okay, or there's many other examples, obviously. Looking at the other end of the spectrum of communication, once a message is received, it's decoded. That's basically the exact opposite. It's how we process the information and come to understand it. So, looking real quick at what's known as the traditional model, where we start with a source, they encode a message. The message travels over a channel. That message is then decoded by a receiver. The receiver gives feedback. This can be verbal, nonverbal, it can be instant, it can be delayed. That feedback is relayed back to the source of the message and then is encoded through a channel, decoded back, and then that process continues once again. Now you might notice that there's these squiggly lines in between the encoding and decoding portions of the model. This is called noise, and you can see in another visualization of this traditional model, same idea, just a different visualization. Once again, there's that noise. So when we're talking about noise, we're talking about, you could be talking about a very literal example of noise, like it's hard for me to understand what you're saying because we're in a busy restaurant and it's really loud and I can't hear you, and that's getting in the way of communication. But it can get trickier than that. Noise can be internal, so I could just be my thoughts are consumed by something else. I'm really stressed. I have other things going on in my life, and therefore when you're communicating with me, I'm not really focused, I'm not paying attention, and I'm therefore not able to properly decode your message and give feedback. So there's different types of noise. Once again, I talked about environmental noise, so that's like, if it's just too loud. There's also mechanical noise, and that's, very important with mass media. So if my internet connection is really slow and choppy, that could interfere with mass communication and me receiving the messages via websites. Static. On the radio, a bad picture because I'm not picking up the channel on television. Even something as simple as like a printed document, but there was, the ink was really low, and so I can't even read the message properly. Or there's semantic noise where the arrangement's confusing, or people can actually decode the message in a way that you didn't intend when you encoded it. So people can attribute different meanings to words and phrases and things that you're saying. And so that's an example of noise as well. All of those things that get in the way of proper communication. So that all leads us to this class and what we're talking about, mass communication, mass comm. So we talked about shared meaning. Well, that applies to mass comm as well. Mass comm is the process of creating shared meaning between the mass media and their audience. And this happens in many ways through many different mediums: television, radio, film, music, video games, the internet, social media, and the list goes on and on of these examples of mass media that create this shared meaning between themselves and audience. So here is the book's model of mass communication. This is Schramm's model of mass comm, where you can see there's similar elements to that earlier model that we looked at. There's the decoder, the interpreter, the encoder, and you've got all of these messages going out. But the difference here is this is a mass audience that's receiving the messages. Many different receivers. Each of them are decoding, interpreting, and then encoding information, but they might do that in different ways. So you can see these are all separate groups. They might be getting different messages that are specifically designed for them, target demographics, okay? And then all of these give what we call delayed inferential feedback. This can be in things like TV ratings. This could be in comment sections of Facebook. There's so many examples of ways that we give feedback back to mass media organizations. There's also input from news sources, etc. All of these play a role in the ways that this stuff is interconnected in the mass communication model. The book goes on to connect mass comm to culture. So we have to define culture. Once again, culture is a learned behavior of members of a social group. This obviously affects the way that we interpret media messages. So culture is important, and it's important to understand its link to communication. I've got some slides here related to mass media and technology. Particularly the book talks about this idea of technological determinism and saying, that some people believe that, technology determines where society goes and the way that we communicate. But we might need to think about taking a broader look and just saying that technology plays a big part in it, but there's all sorts of other factors at play in the process. We can see that obviously there's a large scope of media use that's broken down in the chapter. Average in our country, over an hour on mobile phones, over 2 hours on the internet, over 4 hours with TV on, so on and so forth. And the book talks about things like media literacy, the impact of print. All of this stuff is obviously very important, but I'm not going to cover all of it in this introductory video. The chapter wraps up talking about media literacy skills, which is a big important part of this class, which is essentially learning how to read media messages more knowledgeably, understanding when a message might be biased, understanding who the gatekeepers are that are determining everything from why this story was chosen to be reported, and then beyond that, why it was chosen to be reported in this way, what advertisers were linked to that media organization, why are they choosing to advertise with them, why are they not choosing to advertise with them. There are so many factors at play. Obviously, as you know, a lot of it comes down to money and influence, and so media literacy becomes increasingly important in this age where we are constantly surrounded by mass communication and media. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope that these introductory videos have been helpful in getting you better acclimated to the class and the information that we're covering. Once again, I'm very happy to have you in the course. This is a class I really enjoy, and you're going to hopefully learn a lot over the course of the next 13 weeks. Please email me if you ever have any questions at aporter@parkland.edu. Make sure you're checking your student email regularly and check Cobra on a regular basis as well. Everything's due next Saturday night for Unit 1. Thanks.